For now, let's bring you this. Should South Africa be moved to a higher coronavirus alert level? That's top of mind for many people. Well, that will be the subject of the National Coronavirus Command Council that's meeting later today. Last week, the Ministerial Advisory Committee advised government to put the country under alert level 2 of the lockdown as a precaution for the upcoming Easter holidays. Now, under level 2, gatherings should be restricted to about 50 people. There'll also be a curfew at about 10 p.m. and restriction on the sale of alcohol back to that Monday to Thursday arrangement. The advisory committee also wants beaches closed and interprovincial travel restricted in order to avoid a third wave of this pandemic. To discuss the possible economic implications, let's bring in Martin Kingston from Business for South Africa. He joins us now via our video link. Martin, it's always great getting your insights on these issues. Thanks once again for making time to chat to us. You know, dare I say, Easter is a religious matter as it is becoming a commercial matter. And because of that, there's big money involved. The question then becomes, is South Africa in a position to forego that for a second consecutive year?
Well, good morning, Ayanda, to you and your viewers. As you say, this will be the second year. Last year, we were effectively in level 5 lockdown over Easter. And what we did as a consequence of that was we did, of course, flatten and defer the first wave. We're now looking at the prospect of a third wave. We're worried about the possibility of a further variant arising in the context of the third wave. And there's no price that anybody in business or indeed in society at large is going to put on or should be prepared to put on the cost of a life. We need to take the pressure off our healthcare system, as we know, and we need to avert as many mortalities or infections as possible. And we're suggesting, as you've said, alongside, I believe, the Ministerial Advisory Council, that we should move to level 2 or adjusted level 3. We don't think that constrains the economy particularly. You called out alcohol. We're not suggesting that there should be any restrictions on alcohol, but we do think that there should be limits on the numbers of people who can gather at any one location. And we do think that curfew hours should be extended to reduce the amount of movement of people over that holiday period. And finally, we should do so in anticipation of, rather than after super spreader events, which are bound to happen. And we now know for a fact, I think, from all of our work globally, that super spreader events can act as a catalyst or magnify the risk of subsequent waves.
Right. The MPC is expected to announce the decision on its interest rate, I believe, sometime later today. We've seen unprecedented cuts in the year gone by, but there's predictions that things will remain the same in this particular decision. I mean, do you think that's the best way to go about the continual stimulus of the economy? Because that's, without a doubt, still the objective, right?
We don't expect change, as you say, from the MPC, although they've been fairly accommodative over the last year. The reality is that we've got an extremely constrained fiscus. We need to keep our eye on inflation. That is, of course, the role inter alia of the MPC. And we need to make sure that we can get the economy moving and firing on all cylinders, despite the constraints that we're facing, and recognizing, as we all know now, that we saw a 7% contraction in GDP, and we probably lost about 2 million jobs in the formal and informal sector last year. Both of those are, of course, extremely dramatic and problematic challenges for South Africa in this current environment. So we need to do everything we can to stimulate and maintain economic activity. We don't think moving from level 1 to level 2 would actually curtail economic activity in any significant regard. Interesting
you say that. What about this particular move do you think doesn't in fact affect the economy adversely? Because part of what I also wanted to ask is, how can we make this a more targeted approach than we have in the past? We know a whole lot more about COVID-19 than we did this time last year. And, you know, many will argue that there's no point in just moving through the different lockdown levels and accepting all the restrictions that come with it without having a targeted measure, so to speak.
That's absolutely correct, Ayanda. We've learned an enormous amount over the past year when we went, of course, into a hard lockdown level 5. And throttling between the different levels needs to be done with ease and with appropriate applicability, exactly as you've indicated, so that we don't create unnecessary breaks on economic activity. We think that if the only thing that we need to do in reality at this to effectively curb the likelihood of super spreader events. That's by constraining the number of people who can assemble in any one location, either indoors or outdoors, to 50 or 100, and reducing the amount of mobility by, for example, extending curfew hours to, say, 10 o'clock until 4 or 5 in the morning. We don't think that that has any devastating impact on economic activity at all. It's mobility more broadly, or indeed targeting particular sectors that we're concerned about, which is why we're adamant that to the extent that we can avoid restricting, for example, alcohol sales in an appropriate and responsible way, that's the appropriate manner to move forward at this stage.
You know, you've mentioned in part some of the trends we're also seeing further afield. I wonder if we're able to speak sustainability of business during COVID-19. The idea of a lockdown is becoming less and less popular across the globe because of just the sheer cost it comes with. Insofar as South African policy is concerned, do you feel we're starting to carve out even just a blueprint of what running a business sustainably during a pandemic will look like, even as we go through the different peaks and resurgence which have been predicted from the onset of the outbreak?
I think we have a much better feel for the way in which we can all manage our businesses, large and small, international and local, across all sectors than we did a year ago, but it's far from perfect. We now need to again fine-tune that approach. Most importantly, we need to ensure as a country that both within the private sector and with public sector support, we provide the requisite underpin to small and medium-sized enterprises, to particularly informal businesses that are not able to cope, that don't have the balance sheets that are able to support them during not only lockdown but the economic downturn that we've seen and experienced over the past year. And we need to acknowledge that it's going to probably take us 3 or 4 years to return to pre-COVID-19 levels of economic activity, even longer in the context of levels of unemployment that's clearly unsustainable in the current South African environment, which means that there needs to be a much higher level of both focus on priorities in the economy and the implementation of structural reform, which we as business have called out for regularly and government has agreed to in the context of its reconstruction and recovery plan, because it's only that that's going to improve investment confidence and, as a consequence of that, result in sustained growth and the creation of long-term jobs.
Very quickly then, if the decision makers in the Command Council were to be listening to our discussion, and in the context of real prospects of a third wave, what ought to be top of the agenda of this Command Council meeting when they gather later today?
We believe that if there's only one intervention that should be taken, it is to restrict the number of people who can gather either indoors or outdoors at any one location to 50 indoors and 100 outdoors. And if there's a secondary measure, as I said, it is to extend curfew hours beyond the current hours of midnight or 11 o'clock until 4 in the morning.
Martin Kingston from Business for South Africa, always great getting your insights. Thanks very much indeed.